Good morning and welcome to today's press conference. Bienvenue à cette conférence de presse. My name is Mia Rabson and I will be moderating the press conference today. We will start with speakers in the room, and I believe we have one on Zoom. And at the moment there are no questions in the room, so we will try Zoom questions if we have any. You can go ahead.
I'm wondering if we could start, please, with MP Naheed Farid. She actually has COVID and she's sick and she's agreed to come on. So I'd appreciate it if we could do that, please.
Sure. Go ahead, Ms. Farid.
Yes, sure. Thank you so much for having me, dear moderator and panelists and ladies and gentlemen. It's my true honor, it's my pleasure to be speaking at this conference. This is Naheed Farid, the member of Afghanistan Parliament, chairperson of Women Affairs Commission, and professional specialist at Princeton University. And I've served in Parliament for more than 11 years, since 2019. And I appear before you today still in a shock that the Taliban and the Haqqani network and other terrorist groups have taken over Afghanistan. I cannot count on how many friends and colleagues I have lost to the Taliban violence, to their targeted assassination. But now they are ruling the country. A week before they took Kabul, the Taliban entered Herat, the city that I'm representing, and I was leaving, search for my family. Imagine, luckily my family and I were able to escape with just our clothes on our back. We fled to safety, and now I'm among thousands of displaced women who left our lives behind, not knowing if and when we will ever return back to Afghanistan. Friends, the Taliban cannot be trusted in any way. They have overthrown a democratically elected government, took a nation of 35 million people hostage. They have never denounced and cut their ties with Al-Qaeda. They have given the other extremist and fundamentalist group all over the world the sense of pride and confidence to do the same thing in their geography. And for the people of Afghanistan that I represent here today, life under the Taliban has caused widespread public panic. The past few months have been dominated by mass killings, targeted assassinations, extrajudiciary trials, forced relocation, confiscation of properties and assets of leaders, civil society activists, high-ranking members, disappearance of protesters, and so many other atrocities that are going on in Afghanistan. More than 100,000 young, skilled professional political leaders, civil society activists have fled the country. This is unprecedented brain drain in the history of Afghanistan. Many tens of thousands of government workers and other minority human rights defenders, journalists who remained in the country now stay in home, stay in fear, or stay hidden. Schools are closed for the girls, government-run universities as well. The country's defense and security institution has been dismantled. Thousands of ISIS prisoners are free from the prisons and released to do anything in Afghanistan. So I want to be short. I can continue and tell you for hours what's going on in Afghanistan, but it's all over the news. We all know the atrocities, the gender apartheid, the genocide that is going on in Afghanistan. But how can Canada government help Afghan people? I have had so many meetings with members of your government these past few years, and I know how so many of you feel deep bond with the people of Afghanistan, especially with the Afghan women. Beside of the Taliban recognition ban, beside of the humanitarian assistance that Afghan people need, I'm going to ask specifically the government of Canada how they can help Afghan refugees at this dire situation, at this dire crisis. I also would like to use the opportunity and applaud the Canada's commitment to assist thousands of Afghans at risk. Words, sentences cannot describe what does new life mean for the Afghans who has been helped and came to the Canada. The life that could have been completely ruined, it could have been completely destroyed. they start a new life. This is for many of those people. But let's admit that with all its good intention, Canada's respective government has outsourced so many of the commitments to protect, evacuate, and resettle Afghans at risk to civil society, to other private sectors, to other governments, and this complicated the process. As the leaders of your institution, I urge you as the government of Canada to implement policies that will address the pressing needs of Afghan at risk. Uphold your commitment to the Afghans who are at risk. Your governments need immediately develop a plan and assign the necessary human and financial resources to enable rapid evacuation of those who are eligible in Afghanistan. Even if the threshold of 40,000 refugee intake is already full, the responsibility and the commitment and the determination is still there. There is a dire need for a durable solution.
Naheed?
Yes?
Please forgive me for interrupting, but something has happened to your sound. I'm not sure whether, I think you knocked over your microphone because we really can't hear you. And we will need you to make your closing comments, if you would. Just take a moment. But if you could make sure your microphone, is working.
How is now? How is now?
Yeah, that's much better.
So, oh my God. Shall I start from the?
Could you summarize? If you could just make your closing comments now, please. Thank you. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. So your government needs to immediately develop a plan and assign the necessary human financial resources to enable the rapid evacuation of those who are eligible. Even if the threshold of 40,000 refugee intake is already full, the responsibility and the determination and the commitment is not done yet. There is a dire need for a durable solution, and there are so many cheaper alternatives to evacuate those who are at risk. And temporarily, there are temporary houses in third countries. The ground has been done like UAE, Qatar, Macedonia, Kosovo, Albania, where thousands of vulnerable Afghans have already been relocated, waiting for their cases to be processed. But we also would like to ask Canada to urge its NATO allies and other countries who committed billions to Afghanistan over the last 20 years to do more, because many of those countries effectively closed their doors to Afghan refugees. The other thing we want is that we want the process of applying for Canadian visa easier for people of Afghanistan, developing expanded pathways to resettlement in Canada. This could include setting up a temporary resident program for those who hope to return back if it is safe, creating a special scholarship, facilitating employment visas, other options that could expedite the application process for at-risk Afghans, and creating a pathway for thousands of human rights defenders, religious, ethnic minorities, journalists, and other at-risk groups. I would like to stop here, but I would like to ask and also to highlight the fact that Afghanistan, that freedom and the free Afghanistan exists in the mind and hearts of people of Afghanistan. We will retake our freedom. At this dire humanitarian and human rights situation, we need the solidarity of the government of Canada to stay with us and to walk this very bumpy and even path with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Naheed. You've summarized directly from your experience the very issues that senators are here this morning to speak out about. And now I'm going to ask Senator Salma Ataullahjan, please.
Thank you, Senator McPhedran. Naheed, salam alaikum, dear manana, tasu dear khwage khabare ukre. As someone who has traveled extensively in Afghanistan and knows the people, has connections as an ethnic Pushtun, it pains me. It hurts me deeply to see what's happening in Afghanistan, to the children of Afghanistan, to the women in Afghanistan. So I want to say at the outset that this is, Canada has done a lot. Canada has done a lot of good work. But the issue that we're having and the issue that I'm having is please don't put a cap on the number of refugees that can come to Canada, 40,000. And I know that those 40,000 are all spoken for, but there's a lot of women who need help. And if you look at the numbers coming out of Afghanistan and conversations that I have with people, they're saying 98% of women have lost, their means of economic support. And it's especially harder for widows because they cannot go out and earn a livelihood as they could before because the Taliban demand that a man be with them. We're also hearing of the children at risk of starvation. The numbers will come out, because those of us who know Kabul, we know that the winters in Kabul and the rest of Afghanistan are absolutely brutal. There's food insecurity. And if we speak frankly, I think Afghanistan currently is the worst place on earth to be. And it's not getting any better. And the Taliban, no matter what they said, have become more brutal. And I think we've all seen videos. I know I get videos of people being beaten up in the streets, of women being beaten, of children begging. I can no longer watch those videos because I'm Pushtun. 60% of Afghanistan's Pushtun. We have a border that, I'm originally from Pakistan, there's a border that divided us. But, on a humanitarian level, how can we not feel for these women and these children who, through no fault of their own, are living through these conditions? And I want to refer back to the study that the Human Rights Committee did in 2011, which I sponsored on, as Canada was getting ready to pull out of Afghanistan. We did a study about what happens to the gains that the Afghan women have made. And we had some recommendation. It's deja vu. 2022, again, we're talking about the women in Afghanistan. And again, we're very helpless as we watch them suffer. And I can't even put into words, how it breaks my heart, the stories that we hear, the emails that I get. And as someone who was recently in Pakistan, I went and met some of the people over there and the issues they're having, their problems they're having. Some of them don't know how they'll survive from day to day. So I asked the government, Canadian government, you have done a lot. Canada has been incredible in supporting Afghanistan and the people of Afghanistan, but we need to do a bit more. And especially, please, don't say 40,000 is it. How can you put a cap on refugees? We need to help those in need. Thank you.
Senator Omidvar.
Thank you. Thank you so much, MP Naheed Farid and Senator Ataullahjan. I think when Senator Ataullahjan said we can't put a cap on refugees, she's completely right, because by putting a cap on refugees, we put a cap on lives. We put a cap on freedom. I think we all want to remember the horror with which we watched Kabul fall last August. And in that time, all our worst fears of the Taliban have come true. They have killed dissidents. They have severely restricted the rights of women and girls, and they have threatened human rights defenders. Just as one example, a few weeks ago, Yaim Nassim, a young 24-year-old, was shot dead in Kabul, even as he was waiting to apply to come to Canada as a refugee. Many of the Afghans who are seeking protection of Canada have actually worked with Canada, either with the Canadian mission or with Canadian institution or Canadian NGOs. And we have a moral imperative to protect their lives, because whether we intended to or not, their lives are in danger because of their association with us. So I think we simply cannot leave them out to dry. And so far, we have settled 15,000 refugees from Afghanistan. And I too want to thank the government and our public servants for really putting themselves out in a wonderful way to bring 15,000 people to safety. But I think there is no doubt in our mind that more needs to be done and more must be done. And there is a playbook to follow, and that is the Syrian playbook. We learned many, many lessons during that Syrian crisis. And I'm afraid that instead of following the playbook and learning from the lessons, we are in fact very rapidly losing the lessons from that crisis. And top among those lessons is the creation of a high-level interdepartmental committee chaired by a cabinet minister and including the Minister of Global Affairs, Immigration, Public Safety, etc., to come together on a bi-weekly basis to remove the hurdles to settlement that only political will can create. It's not the public servants who can remove certain barriers. It is the politicians who can do that. It is the politicians who can set firm timelines and move our resources to ensure that our delivery is accompanied by results. I think also Canada must cut through unnecessary red tape when it is imperative to do so. And I talk particularly about the prima facie status for Afghans fleeing persecution by acknowledging the obvious, by acknowledging that there is a crisis in Afghanistan and the people who are fleeing are refugees. We can cut through all the red tape that currently envelops the system and holds back the resettlement process. So I will just simply say this. History is a marvelous teacher. We have done this before. We can do this again if we have the will to do so.
I want to thank everybody who is here today, in particular my sister senators, and also, of course, to you, Naheed. It is a great privilege to have you with us to speak these important truths directly from your experience. And I know that you worked very hard trying to stay in Afghanistan, to work for your country. And it was only when you and other women parliamentarians realized you were marked for murder that you had to leave. And this is a time when the parliamentarians from Afghanistan, in particular the women parliamentarians in Canada, more coming, and parliamentarians like ourselves will stand together. And this is a long-term commitment that you have for us. We are here today to thank the Government of Canada, to say that we have done much, and much of it we have done well. But we also must respectfully and earnestly say today that we have to do better. The senators that are sitting here, each of us has been working on individual cases, and we have been working together, raising questions in question period, interfacing with officials at IRCC and other connected departments. And I'm now going to speak just for myself as an individual senator working on cases. And I'm going to present to you a case study that I think illustrates challenge that we're facing here of ineffectiveness that we really have to fix. When Kabul fell, two women who worked for Canada in the same NGO, in the same office, sat together and made applications. At that time, it had to go to the Global Affairs Canada portal. One of them received an answer back, and she is about to get on a plane to come to Canada. The other received nothing back, applied again, received an auto reply, applied again, received nothing back. Now, my team has raised this case, this comparison, directly with key IRCC officials. I have no doubt of their concern. But the effectiveness in responding to this is a case study we need to look at. Because even after we verified that this is a woman who served Canada, whose entire salary was paid by Canada to the NGO, side by side with her colleague is about to arrive in Canada, and we still don't even have an invitation to apply. For Zed. I'll call her Zed to protect her identity. So there is a real gap here between the consistency of what was promised when it was Minister Mendocino right after the fall of Kabul, what has since been promised again as recently as last week in a meeting that Senator Omidvar organized with Minister Fraser, where the commitment, the words are strong, but we have some inefficiencies here and some inconsistencies here. The last point I want to make about this case study is that in August and in September, I was involved in a number of cases that allowed me to reach out to our ambassadors in embassies in 4 different countries. And in each of our embassies or high commissions, as we know, we have IRCC officials. I'm very pleased to say that in August and September, there was responsiveness, that the biometrics got done, and those people, those Afghans, are here. What's happened now is a centralization in the administration of applications, and there's merit in that. But a hard line has now been drawn between our diplomatic corps, who have been incredibly helpful and resilient and responsive in August, September, a little bit in October. And that hard line is really stopping the resolution of cases like the one I just outlined, where the criteria have clearly been met, but something is bogging down and nobody is able to say who is actually making the decision, who is actually making this happen. Not the ambassadors, not the officials that parliamentarians like us are told to speak to, and so far, not the minister's office. So somehow we have to know how these determinations are being made. I think we can applaud our colleagues on the Special Committee of Parliament and look forward to the recommendations and the findings that will be coming. They're in their very last week of their hearings. And as a country, as Canada, we've made promises. We're going to keep the promise in the mandate of Minister Fraser for, quote, at least 40,000. One of our key messages here today is we can't stop at that number. We can't nudge it just above the 40,000 and think we're somehow finished. And we have to be consistent. We have to keep the promises we've made. We have to follow through on our criteria, particularly for women human rights defenders who have been left stranded in many countries, having no idea whether they're ever going to get to Canada. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We can now go to questions in the room if we have any. I'm not sure. Joyce Napier from CTV News.
Hi, Joyce Napier, CTV. Sorry, I'm late.
You're welcome.
Could you explain in a nutshell, what is the fundamental problem? Is the problem coming from the Canadian government to get these people to Canada, or are the problems elsewhere?
I'll jump in, and I'm sure my colleagues will as well. It's not either or. Every country where we have Afghans waiting, some of them processed, some of them not even begun, there's a different dynamic on the ground. That's why I was making the point about the resilience and responsiveness at the embassy or high commission level and how important that was in the early days for the cases where we were actually able to A, get people out, and B, get them here. So what has happened in my experience, and again, I'm just speaking personally, is that we have very dedicated officials who basically can't seem to answer most of the key questions about some of these cases. And the decision-making, I have no idea where these decisions are made, because I'm told repeatedly that the minister doesn't make any special decisions, that the decision to issue an invitation to apply, for example, for Zed in my case, they can't tell me who actually makes that decision. But they make it very clear that it's not them, the officials that I'm dealing with. So there's a wizard behind the curtain here, and it is a time when I don't know who to turn to now. That's one of the reasons why we made the decision to speak out.
So There's a lack of clarity. When we call IRCC, we ask, we're not really getting any answers. But I know that some of the countries, before they let the refugees in, they want them to have a visa to Canada. And that's been a huge stumbling block. So, and like Senator McPhedran says, the wizard behind the curtain, we really don't know. And, we just want to highlight this issue because things are not getting better in Afghanistan. If anything, they're getting worse, especially for women. You saw what happened to the journalists last week. They had to be covered. And so we just want to know what's happening. Where do we stand? Who do we go to?
My perspective, I would say, and I'm going to focus on the people still in Afghanistan, there are two sets of problems. And it's complex. I think we should all admit that it's extremely complex. So one is extraction of those people who are clearly fall within the criteria of Canada, even if they have visas, even if they have approval, getting them to safety. We have terrific organizations on the ground like Aman Lara who are trying their best to do so. Then there's another set of problems, and that is the lack of response from IRCC to people who are applying, people like Senator McPhedran's case. And that, I think, and this is just a conclusion on my part, that with the absence of high-touch political leadership on case files, what we're seeing is that the protocols and processes that surround IRCC in this issue have become institutionalized to such a great degree that they become impregnable fortresses. Instead of being enablers to a passage to safety, they become blockages. So I think that's why we need a high-level cabinet committee to move things through in a manner that speaks to the cases as opposed to the need for the system to follow process A, B, C, or D, because that makes it extremely hard for people who are still in Afghanistan.
Let me give one more really specific example on this. If Senator Jaffer had been able to be with us this morning, she would have gone back to her experience when Prime Minister Chrétien appointed her special envoy, a senator, but also special envoy in the Sudan crisis. And one of the points that she was making in our discussion when talking about how we've hit all these barriers, and my goodness, if senators can't facilitate the process, I mean, this is a big reason why we're sitting before you today. But one of the key points that Senator Jaffer made was that when you have an envoy position, not unlike when Bob Rae was the envoy for the Rohingya crisis, they can go to everyone. They can move horizontally, they can move vertically, they can bring people together. What we're seeing right now are these hard lines, for example, between global affairs and IRCC, where when you go to the people that were the fixers, in August and September now, they're like, no, it's entirely RCC. We can't do anything. Our hands are tied. So there's a receptiveness, a resilience, a responsiveness that's missing.
So what are you expecting from this press conference? So you seem to say this is our last resort. We've knocked on doors and we're getting nowhere. So where do you go from here?
Well, I need to make the point that there are some individual cases that my team and I have been working on where we have had success. And I thank the officials who were able to facilitate. I will say that they are one at a time for the most part. And the reason I brought the case study of Zed forward was that she meets all of our criteria. We promised. And you have this clear example of something's happening with that wizard behind the curtain. Somehow, these two women in identical circumstances who applied at the same time, one of them is about to fly here to Canada and the other hasn't even been given an invitation to apply. We managed to get her out from Afghanistan. I mean, the Canadian government does nothing in terms of extractions out of the country. That all happens on the ground through a whole network that we're probably among ourselves, we're probably working with 12 different organizations in trying to get people out. we got them out, Zed and her family, and now they're sitting in Pakistan. Private donors are raising money, trying, and one of the points that Senator Omidvar made, which I think is a really serious practical point here, is that there have been key recommendations out of Lifeline Syria that were made that pointed out that private sponsorships are a fantastic idea. Canada's a leader in the world, but the red tape that Senator Omidvar talked about, we're losing donors. I can tell you that in terms of Zed, my case study, we had donors lined up, and when they got the actual bill they had to come up with, $70,000, we almost lost them. I mean, what's happened is that now there's a community fundraising campaign to try and bring this in. We're not at the goal yet. There's a rigidity to the process that is not focusing on how serious the crisis is. And if you're going to have people stepping up, Canadians and Canadian groups stepping up, they're not going to abandon someone when they arrive in the country. I'll let Senator Omidvar speak about some more of those changes, but there just needs to be more of a realistic response to the willingness of Canadians and community organizations to help and how hard it is for them to do so.
I'll focus on the system and the structure. I think the Prime Minister needs to establish a high-level cabinet committee to ensure that those we have promised to protect are moved very quickly through the system. Refugee resettlement is about saving lives. Therefore, it needs to be fast. I think the Prime Minister should consider providing prima facie refugee status to those Afghans who are outside the country who meet all the criteria, instead of waiting for them to go through 2 years of hoops and bureaucracy to maybe be eligible. And I agree that private sponsorship should be leveraged far more than it is being currently done so by removing the red tape surrounding it. Those are 3 asks we have.
So for me, I don't want the people and Afghanistan to be forgotten. You know, things are happening around the world, and I personally feel that Afghanistan is kind of falling through the cracks. And I want to go back to the Human Rights Committee, the study that we did on the resettlement of Syrian refugees, where, like Senator Omidvar said, we found that private sponsorship really helped. And we found that those refugees who had private sponsors were very, very successful in resettling in Canada. And we came out with some recommendations. So there's lessons there that can be taken from that study that the Human Rights Committee did. So, but primarily for me, I don't want Afghanistan to be forgotten, and the people and the women and children of Afghanistan to be forgotten.
I'm going to ask a couple of questions from the moderator's chair here. You mentioned that you don't want a cap. You don't want that 40,000 cap. But if the issue right now is that we've only settled 15,000, have we run up against that cap in any way? Like, why are we worrying about that number right now instead of getting at least to that cap?
Thank you so much for that question, because this speaks directly to an experience I had in the last 2 weeks, where there's a responsiveness to us as senators to have conversations with IRCC officials. So that's a good thing. However, in the conversation, what was conveyed to me was that they are almost at 40,000. So we only have, I think it's 8,500 was the figure that most recently came through in questions, answers to us in the Senate yesterday. But what the officials are telling us is that they're almost at 40,000. And so then it becomes, and yesterday I tried to get some help for Zed through one of the sponsoring organizations that are given spaces, the Afghan Women's Organization, and they wrote back and they said, we don't have a single space, not a single space. As soon as we get some, we will be back to you and we will try our best to help Zed and her family.
So the government has always said, to their credit, that they would settle at least 40,000. So we're asking them to go the next step, announce the next level. But I think the government should also be creative about bringing vulnerable Afghans to protection through other non-refugee routes. So, for instance, we know of cases of international students who have been accepted into Canadian post-secondary institutions, who have taken online courses, who have paid the fees, but they're not getting visas because, for the most part, international students must state that they have a place to go back to. Now, okay, I think we all know what we're talking about here. It's impossible for them to commit to going back. So there are routes that there are sort of lanes that the government could very readily explore if it was willing to do so.
So just,
And like I said, let's not put a cap on, the refugees.
and so just to clarify that the issue now is that we have sort of filled that 40,000. They just aren't all here yet. And so people who are now applying need to, okay. And as a follow-up, I'm just curious if you could sort of take me through what happens when you get a case. Someone comes to you and says, we can't get, this person is not able to what's been the process? What are the barriers that, like, sort of the routes that you were taking and all of the doors that sort of seem to get closed? But also, if this got worse once Ukraine happened, if that you saw that sort of add to the bottlenecks?
I'll answer that shortly, yes, and yes. And I mean, the people at IRCC are human beings. They have lives, they have families, they deserve to get some sleep. This isn't about calling any of them bad people. But what we're trying to address here today is some of the specific examples of the systemic problems that we see occurring over and over again. And this is not the first crisis where these systemic problems have been identified. So I think we're really saying, can we please learn from the lessons of the past and not keep repeating this same scenario? I'm not sure what our time is like. I can certainly go into more detail about some of the cases I've worked on, but there's a lot of detail.
Sure, maybe we can follow up after. Do you have any other questions?
I would like to hear from, is this working? Yeah, from, Naheed Farid about this, because we've been talking about this ever since the Taliban returned. There was much said about it, many promises made. It seemed that the process was going to be, nothing is easy, I understand, that the process would be streamlined, that it would be, at least this time, because it was a crisis, because these people had helped the Canadians. So what would you like the Canadian government to do to make this a little bit easier?
Thank you so much. This is a very important question. I already highlighted few of my thoughts during the initial speech that I had. We can't help many of those who are in danger. We cannot, because 15 millions of Afghan women are living in a very difficult situation. We all know that millions of people are living in a very difficult situation, and we cannot evacuate all of them. But Canada must try its best to increase its refugee intake, the number, to accept those who are eligible. We need Canada government to expand upon its refugee intake of certain Afghan nationals and their families who are really in danger, like the religious minorities, like women rights defenders, like LGBTQ minority people, like the journalists that are living in a very difficult situation, women journalists. I think the recognition of the severe risk of persecution of these people that they face from the Taliban is the initial first step towards opening another pathway, because I saw the pathway, I saw the procedure. So many of my colleagues in the parliament, so many of my people in my constituency tried so many of the pathways that Canada government and IRCC already highlighted. But the procedure is tough. The procedure is very complicated. For example, the people who are, for example, belonging to a minority have to bring some evidence from UNHCR or an equal agency that they do not even accept their calls and they do not even open the doors to them, to these people. I tried one of the families in UAE and took them to the UNHCR office, and they didn't help. So this is not the pathway that can open the way for so many at-risk Afghans that are eligible to come to Canada. Therefore, there has to be a meaningful discussion and conversation on how we can be collectively helpful to help those who are at risk in Afghanistan and open the pathway that can be really a pathway, not just a complicated process that endangers the lives and also consume a lot of money to bring these people to the Canada and other countries that can be part of this.
Just to add to this, as someone who used to chair the Canada-Afghanistan Friendship Group, last year in June, we had a meeting with some of the female parliamentarians. We had 2 meetings, and because I speak Pashto, I understand, and I heard, one of the women saying, we need help right now. So the world was aware. I mean, if the ordinary people are aware that the Taliban are coming, surely the governments knew beforehand that the Taliban are returning, and that they said, we need help now. And on that call, we did have 3 ministers also who were on that call. So the cries for help were coming then to us. And we had one special meeting with the female parliamentarians. We knew things were bad, and we knew they were going to get worse.
This really highlights one of the key points in my choosing to focus on Zed, and that is that we haven't done gender-based analysis to actually find out who made it here, who's getting the invitations to apply. You talked about the promise around streamlining, absolutely, and with that promise also came the promise to have special immigration measures for women human rights defenders who were clearly at particular and extreme risk because they were women human rights defenders. And many of the cases that are stalled are cases of women human rights defenders. They meet the criteria, but we can't get them in the door at UNHCR, and we can't get our local IRCC people in whatever country they are to respond directly to them because it's all been centralized now. So in September, there were 4 different embassies and high commissions involved in 4 different cases directly with my team, and all of them made it here. And what happened was that staff on the ground went to where they were, organized having the IOM testing and the travel arrangements, and facilitated them getting here. That doesn't happen anymore because what I'm told as recently as 2 days ago is we can't touch this. There's a line between global affairs and the diplomatic corps, and even the IRCC staff in our embassy, in our high commission, cannot take any initiative. All of the decisions are made in Ottawa. Big difference.
Okay, I think if we have no more questions, then that'll be the end of today's press conference. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ms. Farid.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, senators.
Take good care.
Thank you so much. Keep the people of Afghanistan in your thoughts and your prayers.
Yeah, well.
Thank you.